They thought it was a joke. "Let's see how she gets back," my husband said, and the rental car pulled away under a small Italian moon. The teacups on the cafe table were still warm. The laughter in the back seat was still loud. And I was still standing there, passport in my purse, dignity in my throat, watching taillights choose a corner I could not follow. My name is Evelyn Hart. For 15 years, I made our life easy. Schedules, dinners, silence. On a narrow street in Italy, Daniel Whitmore, my charming, practiced, careful husband, taught me a lesson about dependence. 1 month later, on a Greek hillside, I had learned a better one about freedom. If you like stories where the breaking point is also the beginning, stay. This one starts with a door slamming and ends with roots in the ground. Let's see how she gets back. Daniel's voice cut through the blue hour like a dull knife through silk. The door slammed. The engine turned. His old college friends, men with middle-aged bravado and vacation sunglasses, laughed like an audience that had been promised a finale. The car eased away. Taillights winked around a bend. Dust rose. Then nothing. I stood there with the argument still half-formed in my mouth. I had asked him to stop drinking at lunch. He had smiled a thin smile that meant later. Then later arrived fast and mean. His friend Cole had said, "She's always controlling you, man," and ordered another round. Marco had clapped Daniel on the back like a metronome. Somewhere between the second joke and the third insult, we stepped outside. We said words we could not take back. He said the line. He left. Silence has weight in small towns. Chairs scraped. The cafe owner pretended not to watch. A couple at the next table pretended not to hear. I checked my phone. No answer. Texts delivered, then nothing. I called Daniel again. Voicemail. I called Cole. Blocked. Marco. Blocked. Every name in that car. Blocked. I counted what I had. €80, $37, 1 passport. A phone with a fear-bright battery. No credit cards. Daniel had offered to lighten my purse that morning, the way some men offer to take a coat. The cheapest pension above a bakery had a narrow bed, a sink, a window over a lane that smelled like flour and exhaust. The woman who handed me the key spoke no English. She patted my arm as if I were a daughter who had finally admitted the truth. Night is different when you are the person left. It breathes. It waits for you to invent a plan. I invented many. He would come back. He would apologize. He would call it a joke. I would be angry. Then we would return to our careful house in Boston where he was respected, and I was supportive, and my design career lived in a closet with the good china. Morning came. He did not. On the second day, I rationed coins and hope. A panini at noon. A short walk around the edge of town, searching hotels and restaurants for our tour group that had no reason to wait for me. By evening, it was clear. They had moved on to Florence, without me. On the third day, the cafe owner brought an espresso I had not ordered and directions to a police station written in a hand that cared. The officer behind the high counter nodded a lot and typed a little and made a small file with my name on it. He had a kindness that could not translate law. I walked out with a paper and the knowledge that it would not call a car. At a pawn shop with dust on the glass and patience in the owner's eyes, I slid off my ring. Not the modest band we began with, the upgraded diamond from our 5th anniversary, Daniel's way of marking success. The offer was low, the lesson was higher. I learned how much I was worth to a stranger who pays cash. I took the money. The bus station felt like a book I had not read yet, lines of destinations in words my mouth could not shape. One call to my father would end all of this. One wire, one flight, one soft return to the life where I had become smaller so Daniel could look taller. My thumb hovered over his name. It dropped instead on a different route. Greece, I told the ticket agent with the kind eyes when she asked where. "The furthest coastal village you can reach." She nodded once, the way women nod when a decision has weight. 14 hours later, after 3 buses and a ferry and the feeling of passing through a keyhole into another life, I stepped into a village whose name I could not pronounce. White walls, blue doors, air like salt and citrus. My phone died somewhere between countries. My stomach was a fist. My feet in tourist sandals burned like I had walked to the horizon. I followed a dusty road out of town because the sea was too beautiful and I did not trust beauty that much. Olive trees flickered silver green in the light, coins on branches. The path rose. My breath shortened. The world tipped. Knees, stone, sky. A soft voice, then hard hands, then water that was both cold and forgiveness. When my eyes focused, I saw her. A woman with weathered hands and the kind of face that has practiced worry into wisdom. "Eleni," she said, tapping her chest. "Evelyn," I said, tapping mine. She pointed toward a stone farmhouse tucked into trees that looked older than the arguments that brought me here. I let her lead. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and something simple on a stove that had outlived seasons. A man with a sun-dark face and a silver mustache stood in the doorway with a towel in his hands and assessment in his eyes. "Nikos," Eleni said, pointing. He nodded once, as if to say, "We have found a situation. We will feed it." Water, soup, a bed that felt like mercy, sleep like a fall. In the morning, roosters I did not negotiate with told the sky to begin. On the chair, a clean cotton dress and a cardigan that belonged to a younger person who had gone. In the kitchen, bread, coffee, a saucer of olive oil and honey, and 2 people who had already decided not to ask for anything they did not need. "Home?" Eleni said, tilting her head and miming a small plane with her hand. I pressed my palms to the mug because warmth is a language. "Not yet," I said. She nodded the way women nod when you have told them the right truth. "Rest," Eleni said. "Stay," she insisted. The first word sounded like care, the second sounded like policy. Rain tapped the windows like a witness. My blistered feet agreed with her. My pride took an hour to catch up. I tried to leave the next day. Eleni stood in the doorway with her mouth in a line and her hand on my sleeve. She led me to a wooden box on the mantel and opened it with the care of a church. Photographs. A girl with Eleni's eyes and Nikos's smile. A new country printed on the back in a loopy script. A baby in another picture. Eleni mimed a cradle and held her hand low to show height. Then she made a small cross over her heart. Her English found one word. "Grandbaby," she said. "No C." Grief recognizes itself. I put my purse back on the hook. Days arranged themselves. Eggs in the morning, laundry that snapped on a line like crisp flags. Herbs hung from beams to dry their voices. Nikos taught me plants by touch, not by app. This is time. This is a weed that looks like time. This is the space between them where attention lives. I pulled wrong once and felt like a thief. He shook his head and put the root back in the ground like a forgiveness that might take. The work dismantled me in the good way. Boston gym muscles and careful posture are not the same as strength. Calluses introduced themselves. Shoulders learned the language of sun. At night, the ache wrote my name from wrist to spine. Sleep answered without negotiation. Eleni's kitchen ran on measures older than cups. She did not read recipes. She remembered them. Flour, water, salt, hands. "Watch," she said, and the dough obeyed. My first loaves came out wrong in every way. Pale or black, bricks or ghosts. She broke them open without judgment and tasted them all. "Learning is not waste," she said, and that sentence put a crack in a rule Daniel had taught me. Make it perfect or make it disappear. Food here did not arrive in packages taller than the person who bought them. It came from a field, a neighbor, a morning. Vegetables still warm from a sun that knew their names. Eggs with shells like quiet art. Cheese that told you the goat's mood. Olive oil on everything the way other places use apology. My body heard the message first. Weight dropped without drama. Skin turned from city cream to something that looked alive without credit. In the small mirror above the sink, I met a different face. Less precious, more present. Language followed. We built bridges from nouns. Bread, water, tree. Thank you. Again. Slower. Please. Laughter did the rest. When Eleni did not have a word, she had a story. When I did not have a word, I had hands. We met somewhere in the middle, where meaning lives. Nikos took me into the grove at first light one morning and handed me a wooden rake. Elis, he said. Olives. He showed the motion. Comb, not tear. The nets below the branches caught what the trees let go. My first hour brought down more leaves than fruit, but he only corrected my hands with his hands and said a word I understood in any language. Slow. By midday, my palms burned. Eleni laughed softly and brought a tin of something that smelled like bees and thyme. She smoothed it over my skin like a mother who had decided I could stay. Tomorrow better, she promised. She was right. Bodies are good at voting for you when you forget you have a ballot. Sorting was harder. Under a pergola with shade like lace, we separated perfect from almost from no. The best fruit for the first press, the bruised for second grade, the broken for soap. It felt like a metaphor and a skill. Eleni watched me with eyes that were kind and strict. Her corrections got smaller as my eye learned how to see. In the evenings, Nikos smoked his pipe and Eleni knit with the authority of a person who has made time behave before. She taught me. I dropped stitches. I swore in English. She laughed in Greek. My first scarf was a soft disaster. I wore it like a degree. When the rain came, we moved inside and Eleni brought down photo albums from a high shelf. A girl with a book under her arm and a teacher's posture. School, she said, tapping the picture of herself. She had left the classroom for the grove. Not a fall, a choice. You? She asked, miming a keyboard and a swatchbook. I showed her photographs of the spaces I had designed before Daniel called it a hobby and I called it peace. She studied them with the attention of a person tasting olive oil. Beautiful thinking, she said, tapping her temple, then tapping mine. I had not cried in weeks. I did then. 3 months into this unintended life, Eleni and Nikos brought me to the press house, a small room that smelled like green and gold, and showed me their bottles lined like quiet soldiers. Market, Eleni said, pointing at the calendar. The village market was a moving pageant of need and pride. Farmers with hands like bark. Baskets of fruit that looked like art without attitude. A weaver with patterns that caught the sun. A butcher who had a laugh for every person and a story for every cut. We set up a small table with our oil, soap, and jars. They put me in front of the table. My Greek cracked, their English cracked. The space between us filled with taste. People bought. We refilled. We ran out of change and found more. By afternoon, the envelope Eleni handed me was not thick, but it was mine. Your part, she said, simple as salt. Fair work, fair pay. The euros under my pillow were not many. They were enough. Enough to say, I am a person who can earn and eat and sleep under a roof because I helped hold it up. That night, I realized I had spent an entire day without thinking about Daniel. The place in my head he used to rent had a new tenant. Verbs. The taverna in the square belonged to a man named Manolis who greeted Eleni and Nikos with a hug you could hear. Our American, Eleni said in Greek, patting my arm as if she had grown me like a tomato. The room was loud with family and fish and chairs that had seen more stories than Stain. Manolis put us at their table without asking because it was also ours. He poured wine with a flourish and a warning look. Slow. Plates landed, bread appeared, oil, our oil, shone in small bowls like small suns. Between courses, Nikos cleared his throat. "Evelyn," he said carefully, using my name like a tool he had sharpened. "We talk business." My heart paused. Had I broken a rule I did not know? Was it time to move on because kindness has a schedule? Eleni slid her hand into mine and smiled the way a person does when she is about to hand you the thing you have been afraid to want. "We old now," she said, counting on her fingers. 68, 70. She pointed between herself and Nikos. "No children here. Sophia in Australia, not coming." She touched the table, the room, the air. "Olive trees 200 years old. Need young hands." Nikos nodded. "You learn fast. You work hard. We teach everything." He opened both hands the way people open a door. "Then," Eleni said, "business yours." Words are heavier when they are a future. I set mine down carefully. "I do not know enough," I admitted. "The soil, the timing, the press, the books." "You learn," Nikos said again, with the stubborn tenderness of people who plant trees knowing someone else will sit in their shade. "We teach. No rush." So, the apprenticeship changed shape. It became an inheritance you earn in public. Mornings in the grove where Nikos taught me to read the leaves for thirst and the bark for warning. Afternoons at the press where the first oil ran like a promise. Evenings with ledgers. Eleni's system worked because she had made it work for years. We added a spreadsheet that turned numbers into patterns. I built labels that told stories, varietal, notes, pairings. We printed them on paper we could afford and put them on bottles that looked like truth. Word traveled the way it always has, mouth to ear to table. Manolis put our premium oil out for tasting with little cards that used my new labels. "Good for you, good for me," he said, and we laughed, because some business is a handshake and a sentence. 2 other restaurants called. The pharmacist stopped by our stall and stayed long enough to ask about Eleni's blood pressure and my verbs. The baker's wife invited me to coffee with other women. They taught me idioms. I taught them to say spreadsheet. We were all very impressed with ourselves. At a baptism for the butcher's granddaughter, the priest took my hand after the service and said in careful English learned a lifetime ago, "You bring new life to Old Grove." He blessed me with water that smelled like history and hummed something that sounded like yes. I did not speak of Boston unless asked. I did not speak of Daniel at all. A weaver named Irini, a widow with a sharp wit and a stall beside ours, noticed the omission and lifted an eyebrow one afternoon as we packed our unsold goods. "You never say his name," she said. "The man who left you in Italy." "Daniel," I said, and it felt like naming a weather system that had already passed. "He did not look for you?" she asked, not because she needed the gossip, but because she was building a file on me labeled friend. "I do not know," I said. "I have not checked." Irini's eyebrow did something eloquent. "Maybe time to look, not for him, for you, to close the door properly." That evening, with Eleni humming in the kitchen and Nikos counting jars like they were sheep, I turned on the old phone I had used as a camera and avoided as a memory. The Wi-Fi worked like a polite guest. Email arrived like a storm. Messages from friends I had let go without explanation. Notes from a mentor who had recommended me for a remote consulting position with a sustainable materials company. Work that sounded like my former life had a hand outstretched. The offer was still open, the last email said, 2 weeks old and patient. Then, a subject line that froze my breath. "I know where you are." From Daniel Whitmore. "Evelyn, it began. "It has taken months and a private investigator, but I have finally tracked you to that backwater in Greece. This has gone on long enough. I am coming to bring you home and end this ridiculous tantrum. My flight lands in Athens on Thursday. Be ready." 3 days. A voice I knew too well telling me what to be. I walked downstairs with the phone like it was something that could burn a hand. Eleni saw my face and closed the ledger. "Bad news from America?" she asked. "Daniel," I said. "He is coming. Thursday." Eleni's eyes narrowed in a way I had seen only once before, when she pulled a snake away from the henhouse with a stick and a word. She slid an envelope across the table. "Good timing," she said. "We wait for right moment." Inside, papers with my name and hers and Nikos's, written in Greek and in English, stamped by a woman in town whose office smelled like ink and law. "Partnership," Eleni said. 1/3 now, not future, now. Tears are a language too. I spoke it for a minute. Eleni let me. Then she pushed a pen into my hand. "You choose what happens Thursday," she said, tapping the papers. "You have home here, business here, friends here." She tapped the phone. "That man does not decide." The next days were not for panic. They were for preparation. Not packing, not pleading. Paper. I met with Daphne Petridis, the village lawyer with a tidy mind and the patience of a saint, and signed divorce papers in 2 languages. I emailed my mentor and said yes in careful words. I wrote to friends, with short explanations and longer apologies that did not ask for anything but maybe a cup of coffee someday. On Thursday, the sky was rude with beauty. Nikos and I were in the press house testing small cups of oil when I heard a rental engine ratchet the quiet. "He is here," Eleni said from the doorway, her voice level as a table. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked into the light. Daniel looked like the city had come to judge the country. Sunglasses that had never seen sweat. A shirt that cost a week of market profit. He scanned the farmhouse with practiced contempt. He did not see me at first. When he did, the shock stuttered his face. "My God, Evelyn," he said. "What happened to you?" "Life," I said. "Work, son." "I have come to take you home," he announced, spreading his arms. "This has gone on long enough." "This," I said, gesturing to the grove, the house, the people who had chosen me without press release, "is home." Eleni and Nico stood behind me like punctuation. They could not follow our words, but they could read the scene. Daniel glanced past me and hardened. "Are these the people holding you here? Because if so, they are the people who taught me how to hold a rake and a ledger, and myself," I said. "I am part owner now." He laughed the way men laugh when they cannot smell their own fear. "Be serious. You are a designer, not a farmer. This is an eat, pray, love detour. Fine, I should not have left you in Italy. It was a stupid, drunken mistake. I am apologizing. Can we go?" "You are not apologizing," I said. "You are negotiating with a tone." He tried charm, he tried reason, he tried reputation. I asked one question that took the air out of his performance. "Why now?" He shifted, his voice dropped. "Your absence is a problem. Clients ask, friends ask. It looks bad," I said. "For your image." "For our life," he corrected, sharp now. "For the life where I became an accessory to your success," I corrected back. I wanted purpose, connection, agency. I have those here. I felt Eleni step forward. She pressed the partnership papers into my palm. The sentence inside them steadied my spine. I handed Daniel a different envelope, divorce papers signed with ink that did not shake. "You left me," I said, not angry now, just finished. "You laughed while you did it. You did not think I would learn the road." He stared at the papers like they were a mirror he did not like. "You will regret this," he said, but even his voice did not believe him. "When the novelty wears off, when you are still hauling olives in the heat at 60, maybe," I said, "but I will regret my own choices, not the ones someone else made for me." Nikos, who had been quiet as a gatepost, stepped closer and spoke a sentence in Greek with a tone that harvests compliance. "What did he say?" Daniel asked. "He said the road to Athens is long and unkind after dark," I said. "You should leave now." Daniel put on his sunglasses because some men armor with glass. He slid into the car because some men only know one direction. The dust rose. The sound faded. The air returned to itself. Eleni's hand found mine. Nikos nodded once. We turned toward the house because olives do not wait for drama to end. The evening had work in it. Oil to filter, jars to label, a list to write for market in the morning. Daniel had tried to teach me dependence. He had taught me a route instead, the road away from a life I did not want and toward one I could carry. I looked at my hands. They were not pretty the way they used to be. They were beautiful in a way that could build. The morning after Daniel drove away, the grove looked the same and I did not. Sun in the leaves, nets folded like quiet sails. Eleni handed me coffee, then the partnership papers again, as if to say, "This is not a dream you can misplace." We walked the rows with Nikos while the light was still kind. He spoke about water the way some people speak about money, quietly, with respect. "Listen," he said, kneeling to press his palm into soil. "Tree tells you." He showed me the difference between thirst and greed, between a tree that needs and a tree that will take just because you offer. It felt like a parable I could live inside. After lunch, I sat at the big table with Eleni and opened my laptop. It had been a decoration in my Boston kitchen. Here, it was a hand. I built a small site with photographs we took on my phone. Eleni's hands on dough, Nikos's hand on bark, a bottle backlit by late light. I wrote lines that tasted like the place. First press, stone quiet, pepper on the finish. I mapped the story of each field, named by wind and slope instead of parcel number. Irini the weaver stopped by, looked over my shoulder and said in English that smelled like pride, "Good words, real words." We made a list of restaurants within 2 bus rides and put together sample kits. A small bottle, a card, a sentence that began with taste and ended with phone numbers. Manolis called that evening to say a tourist had asked for our oil by name. Names are a currency. He paid us with a grin and another order. In the late afternoon, I walked alone to the ridge and watched the sea move like thought. The fear arrived right on time, a train on the old schedule. What if Daniel made trouble? What if Boston made noise? What if I was only brave because of weather? I let it pass through. Then I sent an email to Julian Price, the attorney my mentor recommended for cross-border caution. I told him the facts without the fiction, attached the divorce papers, attached the partnership agreement, and asked for a sentence I could carry in my pocket if the past tried to speak louder than the present. He replied an hour later with 3 sentences that felt like a fence. "You are within your rights. You documented your choices. Keep receipts." That night, under the porch light, Eleni taught me a word that means both patience and ripeness. "Opsimotita," she said slowly, letting each syllable settle. I said it back and felt it land in my chest like a rule. The next days braided themselves. Harvest at dawn, labels at noon, emails at dusk. My mentor looped me into a small project, a remote materials audit for a cliffside inn that wanted eco without greenwashing. I reviewed plans in the late hours with the chirp of crickets doing their work. I wrote a report that sounded like a person, not a brochure. The client wrote back one line. "Finally, someone honest." Eleni read the line aloud in her careful English and kissed my forehead, like I had brought home an A from a school she remembered. On Sunday, Irini dragged me to the women's coffee circle on the square. Laughter, gossip, advice delivered without syrup. When I asked for words for contract, deadline, deposit, they gave me a handful and an expression that translated to make them sign before they smile. I put it beside Julian's email in my mental drawer labeled armor. That evening, as we bottled a small run for a hotel in the next town, Nikos looked up and said, "You stay, you go, both fine. But now, if you go, you take you." It was the blessing I did not know I needed. Choice without debt. I had nearly finished the audit for the Cliffside Inn when a rental scooter coughed into our yard and a young man in a linen shirt hopped off with the confidence of a person who had assigned himself as a messenger. "Delivery for Ms. Hart," he said, saluting me with an envelope that wore a New England law firm's logo like a badge. "Water?" I offered, because Eleni watches me like a mother hawk and will scold me in any language if I forget hospitality. He drank, he left. The dust settled. I opened the envelope at the table with Eleni and Nikos present like witnesses. Inside, a letter from a Boston attorney representing Daniel. It was half threats and half theater. Phrases about abandonment, marital assets, undue influence by third parties. He requested my immediate return to the marital home to discuss reconciliation and logistics. He proposed timelines like a person proposing those would be obeyed because they were written on letterhead. Eleni frowned at the English and looked to me. I read it aloud, then added a translation that included tone. Nico snorted. He pointed to our partnership paper. "This is also letterhead," he said, and I laughed for the first time since the scooter. I sent the entire packet to Julian with the subject line, "Polite nuisance." He called instead of writing. "Classic play," he said. "The subtext is money and face. You have filed. You have residency here through the partnership. You have income. You are not hiding. I will respond. You will not." "What will you say?" I asked. "The truth," he said, "that they can serve filings through me, that all communication will be in writing, that we welcome a fair settlement, and that any attempt to harass you or your partners will be presented to the court as evidence of coercion. Also, that the phrase undue influence will be our favorite toy if they continue." I hung up to find Eleni studying me. "All good?" she asked. "All true," I said. The next morning, I walked into the village and bought a cheap, slim phone. I put 2 numbers in it, Julian's and Manolis's. I left my old phone at home on the shelf beside Eleni's beeswax salve and a feather Nico said brought luck. If Daniel wanted to speak, he could speak to the person I paid to listen. Work helped. It always does. The inn signed my report, asked for a follow-up consult, and sent a deposit that made my shoulders drop 3 inches. We bought a better hose and a sturdier ladder and laughed like people who have decided not to apologize for joy. In the evening, I walked down to the cove. 2 teenagers were daring the sea to be cold. A grandmother knit under a hat made for bigger sun. A small dog named Thanos decided my lap was the right altitude. I cried a little. The quiet kind. The kind that does not require anyone to move. When I wiped my face, I saw Eleni watching from the path, her knitting bag on her arm like a shield. She lifted 2 fingers. "Okay?" I lifted 2 back. "Okay." A week later, a message from my old mentor lit the screen. "Client wants a site visit. Can you host on video from Greece?" I said yes and walked the grove with a headset on, showing stone, light, patience, and how to tell the difference between rustic and ruined. When the client asked why my tone was so sure, I told the truth. Because for months I have practiced being wrong in public and fixing it. That night, Eleni taught me to cut soap. The bars fell clean and pale onto the table. Irini stopped by with a new weave and a rumor. "Your husband hired a second investigator," she said, eyes glittering with the thrill of a town that buzzes on story. "This one asked at the church. Father said he only knows God and the person who pays for candles." We laughed until we had to stop to breathe. I wrote a short letter to my former self before sleep. We are not braver now. We are practiced. Keep practicing. Summer festival came on like a song you cannot get out of your head. Strings of lights, tables pushed together until strangers became cousins. The priest blessed bread, sea, hands. Manolis poured wine and told the same joke 3 times because it got better each round. Eleni danced with Irini and then with Nikos, their feet remembering steps their bones had learned before I was born. Our stall was small: oil, soap, jars, a stack of cards with our new label, and a photograph of Nikos's hand on a branch. People stopped to taste, to gossip, to say they had heard about the American who stayed. I smiled and poured and learned the village art of saying yes to the right things and no with a story. Near midnight, an older man I had not met stood in front of our table and cleared his throat. "You're the one who came and did not leave," he said in Greek that had traveled across wars. I said yes. He nodded, then set a small wooden icon on the table. "For the house," he said. "My wife says your bread is improving. God will forgive the rest." Eleni laughed so hard she had to sit. Later, when the square had thinned and the lights were suddenly romantic instead of practical, my cheap phone rang. 1 ring, then silence. A memory flickered. Daniel used to do that when he wanted me to call back on his schedule. I put the phone back in my pocket and chose my own schedule. On the walk home, with Eleni's arm in mine, I told her a story about a woman who learned to let the ring go to air. She nodded and squeezed. The next morning, smoke. Not panic, the controlled kind, the distance burn that keeps worse fire away. Nikos checked the wind, checked the grove, checked the pump, checked me. "We have plan," he said. We did. Hoses laid, nets moved, tools where they should be, we did not need them, but the muscle of readiness added a stitch to the cloth of belonging. Irini arrived before noon with a basket, and bad news delivered like a pastry. "A letter at the post," she said, "for you." We walked together. The postmistress handed it over with the look women use for other women when men get involved. Inside, a notice of a preliminary hearing date in Boston to discuss financial disclosures. Julian had already forwarded the digital copy with a note. "Routine. I will attend by video on your behalf. Send me updated income from both work streams. Proud of you," I breathed. I printed invoices from the inn. I wrote down market sales. I photographed our ledger with Eleni's neat columns and my untidy English notes. We stacked truth in a folder. It felt like a small wall built from good brick. That evening, as we ate fish that tasted like distance and lemon, a car rode slow past the house and paused. Nikos set his fork down. Eleni did not turn. The car moved on. Later, we found a business card tucked in the gate. A private investigator with a Boston number and a name that sounded like a door that never opens all the way. I handed it to Nikos. He shrugged and lit the oven for tomorrow's bread. After we cleaned the kitchen, we sat on the steps. Cicadas made the night feel full. Eleni leaned her shoulder into mine. "You are not hiding," she said. "You are here." "Yes," I said. "Good," she said. "Hiding is small. Here is big." I slept without dreams. In the morning, I wrote 3 emails. One to Julian with a photograph of the card and a request to inform Daniel's counsel that all future contact in Greece should go through our lawyer in town. One to my mentor with availability for 2 fall projects. One to myself scheduled to arrive in 1 year. If you are still here, plant 2 more rows. If you are not, Remember the word for patience. That afternoon, a tourist couple stopped by our stall. She asked about the oil. He asked about the story. I gave them both. They left with 2 bottles and a promise to write. When they were gone, Irini leaned in and said, "You tell truth like it is a recipe. People can cook with it." "Is that good?" I asked. "It feeds," she said. So yes. The day ended with a sky the color of a ripe fig and a list on the table. Pick, press, invoice, video call, knit 4 rows, sleep. Life is not smaller now. It is exact. It fits. And when my cheap phone rang again, once, I let it be a bell for someone else. The preliminary hearing in Boston happened on a Wednesday I spent in the press house. Julian Price set up the video link on his end. Daphne Petridis sat at Eleni's table with a pot of coffee and a translator on speaker in case words needed a bridge. I wore work clothes because I had work. Oil does not wait for courts. Julian's recap arrived by email before noon. The judge assigned a woman with a reputation for order over theater, dates for disclosures, a warning to Daniel's counsel that private investigators cruising a small Greek village would be noted as harassment. The phrase, "status quo shall be maintained," turned out to be a blessing. No sudden grabs at joint accounts, no surprise sales of assets, no demands that I leave the partnership. Julian ended with, "You presented as stable, employed, and credible through documentation. Keep living. Keep documenting." I replied with 3 words, "We keep receipts," and a photograph of Nikos's neat ledger columns like a prayer. That evening, Eleni lit a candle at the small icon the old man had given us. She crossed herself and then, perhaps by accident or perhaps because I was there, made a small open-handed gesture that looked like welcome. Faith in the village was less a wall than a door that people left unlatched. I stood beside her and said thank you in a language older than vowels. The next morning, a courier brought a list from Daniel's lawyer of household items he proposed dividing. Rugs I had chosen, art we had collected, books with our names inside faded to a mutual possessive. I read the list at the table where Eleni rolled grape leaves. "Take what you love," she said without looking up. "Leave what is heavy." I circled a small number of things. The chipped bowl from a Paris flea market that had taught us to eat peaches over the sink. The framed map we had bought our 2nd year, where we circled places we swore we would go. A quilt my mother's hands had finished the winter before she died. I crossed out the rest. When Julian saw the scans, he called, laughing softly. "I have never seen a shorter list," he said. "It will make them suspicious." "Of what?" I asked. "That you do not want what they understand," he said. "So they will wonder what you do want and be afraid of it." "What do I want?" I asked the empty air after the call ended. Eleni answered without hearing me. "Lunch," she said, and handed me a plate. That weekend, the inn signed a 2nd contract. Manolis doubled his monthly order. Irini taught me a knot for the ends of rugs. Mrs. Whitaker, the neighbor who had begun to swing by with gossip and recipes, told me I was still cutting soap too large and kissed my cheek for trying. One night, the power flickered out. We lit candles and ate bread and tomatoes and cheese by light that forgives faces. Nikos told a story about a storm that had taken the roof off the press house in a year when olives were scarce and money was thinner than paper. "We stayed," he said, as if that one verb contained all the instructions any life ever needed. "And the next year the trees wanted to thank us." I went to sleep thinking, maybe staying can sometimes be a kind of moving. A week later, a man with a clipboard and a smile that tried too hard rolled down our lane in a dusty sedan. "Inspection," he announced in Greek that had an Athens shine to it. "Regional agriculture. Routine." Nikos nodded and led him through the grove, answering questions, lifting nets, pointing at irrigation lines with the pride of a person who knows his work without needing approval. The inspector measured and hummed. When we reached the press house, he pulled out a form and frowned at a line. "Ownership," he said.
I have papers that list 2 names.
Now 3, I said in Greek. Partnership.
New filings? He asked.
Daphne had filed them that morning. I showed him the stamped copies on my phone. He blinked, nodded, and clicked his pen. On the way out, he paused at the yard where Eleni's soap cured on racks.
My wife buys from the supermarket, he confessed. It smells like flowers even when it is not near flowers.
Eleni handed him a bar with a look that said, "This will fix your house." In the afternoon, a girl from the high school arrived with a notebook and a brave expression. "Project," she said, cheeks pink. "Interview for the festival newsletter. New routes, that is the theme." We sat under the pergola. She asked questions in a careful order. "Where did you come from? Why did you stay? What surprised you? What was hard? What is your advice for someone my age?" "Learn a trade with your hands and one with your head," I said. "One will feed the other when it gets hungry." She wrote fast. "One more," she said. "What is the word for the feeling when you are doing the right thing, even if you are scared?" "Practice," I said before I could think of fancy. "It feels like practice." She looked disappointed. Then she smiled, wrote it down, and said, "My grandmother says the same." After she left, Irini appeared with trouble in her eyes. "The investigator is back," she said. "This time he asked Manolis for your hours and whether you are ever alone." "Did he order wine?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "And Manolis poured it so slowly the bottle thought it was winter." We both laughed, the laugh of women who know where their defenders stand. I texted Julian a photograph of the business card with today's date written on it. He replied that he had filed a notice with the court and sent a letter that included the phrases "pattern of harassment" and "community disruption." I saved the PDF and then helped Nikos lift a crate because courts are slow and olives are not. That night I could not sleep. The old habit of scanning for risk returned. I went outside and sat on the steps. Stars were in a mood to show off. Footsteps. Irini, barefoot, carrying 2 cups and a bottle that had no label. "Village whiskey," she said. "Technically not legal, practically important." We drank. We talked about the difference between leaving and being left. She said the first has a plan and the second has a hollow. "You did both," she said finally. "You were left and then you left. That is why the shape fits." Shapes, plans, hollows. I went to bed with a mind that had fewer sharp corners. In the morning, I wrote a list titled "When the Past Comes Knocking" and taped it inside the cupboard. Call Julian. Do not engage. Photograph everything. Bake bread. Work. Eleni read it, nodded, and underlined "bake bread" twice. Harvest swelled. Early fruit from the lower terraces, later from the high rows. Nets like lakes. Rakes like combs, the press singing its soft iron song. We worked with a rhythm that respected knees and heat and the stubbornness of good oil. One afternoon, a package arrived from Boston. Inside, the divided items I had circled. The bowl from Paris, wrapped in paper that smelled faintly like our old kitchen. The map, unframed, still with our circles. The quilt, folded to show my mother's uneven stitching at one corner, the place she always said showed where a hand had learned. There was a letter, too. Daniel's handwriting. I took it to the ridge and read it because some things require distance. "Evelyn, I do not understand you. I am trying to, but I do not. You have always been reasonable. This is not reasonable. The life we had was good. People envied it. Whatever happened in Italy was a mistake I cannot undo. I have said I am sorry. You are making a spectacle of something private. Come home. We can fix it quietly." He wrote about our house, the parties, the trips we had booked, the holidays we owed to families who keep count of appearances. He wrote one true line near the end. "You scare me now because you do not seem to need what everyone needs." I folded the letter around a stone and put it in my pocket to carry the weight for a while. On the walk back, I met Eleni on the path. "Bad?" she asked. "True," I said, "and sad." She nodded. "Two things can be the same time," she said. We pressed until midnight that week. Manolis sent stew to keep the press house fed. Irini sang to the radio off-key on purpose to make Eleni laugh. Nikos told the same story 3 times to test if fatigue made it funnier. It did. On Sunday, we poured the first of the season's premium oil into dark bottles that made the green glow. I wrote the date on each with a hand that had stopped shaking a long time ago. We lined them up. 50 bottles, then 50 more. Enough to pay bills and replace a hose and buy a sturdier table for the market. Enough to feel like the future had mass. That night, I opened my laptop and accepted a winter project from the inn and a spring consultation for a cafe in Athens that wanted its interior to feel like a story without becoming a cliché. I wrote proposals with sentences that named limits. The client signed because clarity is a kind of luxury people will pay for. Julian wrote with a proposed settlement from Daniel's side. It was generous in money, thin in apology, and contained a clause that suggested I refrain from public statements that disparage the marital relationship. I sent back a version that removed the clause and added 1 line. Each party acknowledges that the other is entitled to their story. Julian called laughing again. "You are redefining the genre," he said. "I am writing my contract the way I write my labels," I said. "No perfume words, just taste." 2 days later, while I was measuring soap because Eleni had finally trusted me with the knife, my cheap phone buzzed with a message from my mentor. A Boston magazine wants to profile women who changed careers. They asked for you. I told them only if she wants. I stood very still. The grove hummed. The knife waited. Eleni looked up. "Good?" she asked. "Loud," I said. "Then choose volume," she answered. "Low or high, not someone else's hand on the dial." I wrote back to my mentor, "No profile. Not now, maybe later. Tell them the story is oil and bread and silence that is not empty." That evening, I walked to the cove. The teenagers were gone. The grandmother was asleep in her chair. Vanos, the small dog, materialized and put his chin on my knee like punctuation. I said my choice out loud to the sea. "I will settle," I said. "I will keep the house in Boston for the map and the bowl and the weekends I might someday spend with friends. I will not go back to live there. I will keep the partnership. I will build the work. I will be kind. I will not be quiet when quiet would be a lie." On the way home, I met Irini, who listened and nodded, and then, because she is who she is, said, "Also, you should plant rosemary by the lower wall. It will keep the snails honest." We planted rosemary in the morning. At noon, Nikos came in from the grove with dirt on his cheek and a set to his mouth. He unfolded a paper on the table. A notice from the regional office granting a small grant for traditional producers updating their equipment. Daphne had applied without telling us because sometimes good lawyers act like grandmothers. "New press," Nikos said, stunned and delighted in equal proportion. "New sign," Eleni said, already designing it in her head. "New season," I said, and felt the word settle in my bones like a key. That night, we ate outside. Bread I had baked without supervision. Oil we had pressed with our own hands. Tomatoes from the neighbor who swears she talks to her plants like saints. We toasted with village whiskey poured into coffee cups because our glasses were full of flowers from the icon shelf. "You did not go back," Eleni said softly when the stars arrived. "I came home," I said. She smiled the smile people wear when the story lands where it should, and when my cheap phone rang once on the table and stopped, we let it be the sound of a bell far away in a town that was no longer mine. Mediation felt like a word for other people until it had a calendar square in my week. Julian Price prepped me the way Eleni preps a kitchen, everything in its place before the flame. "We'll be in a virtual room," he said. "A retired judge, their counsel, you, me. The goal is not catharsis. The goal is a document." I took the call from the small office corner we'd carved out of the press house. Behind me, a shelf of ledgers, a plant Eleni swears listens when you speak kindly, a framed photograph of the grove at first light. In the other box, Daniel wore a suit that looked like it missed Boston more than he did. His lawyer did most of the speaking. The mediator, white hair, eyes like a line level, kept her voice steady enough to build on. "We will separate the marriage from the math," she said. "One of those is a story you will each keep. The other is a list we can divide." Julian set the tone like an instrument. Income streams, documented. Residency, documented. Partnership, documented. Receipts, a gospel. We moved room by room through a life I no longer lived. House, sold. Proceeds divided per state law. Retirement accounts, split by formula. Personal property, as already shipped. Spousal support, waived by me. Julian inhaled but did not argue. Replaced with a clean cut and a clause I insisted on. Neither party shall seek to compel the other to relocate or reunite. Daniel asked to speak near the end. The mediator allowed it. "Evelyn," he said, "I don't recognize what you've become." "I do," I said. "Finally." The mediator cleared her throat and the document kept writing itself. 2 hours later, we had a term sheet. Julian's email arrived before the olive bread cooled. We did it. Draft pending. Do not reply to any private overtures. Sign through me. Then go back to the trees. I did. And the trees had news. Our new press arrived on the back of a flatbed that crawled up the lane like a parade float, wrapped in tarps, tied with ropes, blessed by 3 neighbors and a stray cat with opinions. Nikos touched the steel like it was a cousin returned from sea. We spent a day reading the manual and another day ignoring the parts that did not apply to a place where the power blinks when goats sneeze. "Name?" Eleni asked that night, pointing to the blank on our label where a batch title belongs. I wrote it slowly, in the hand I use when I want to be brave. "After Italy." We took 3 cases to Manolis at the taverna. He poured a thread of the new oil into a small dish, swirled it the way people swirl wine when they want time to think, then tasted with the blunt reverence of a person who has eaten honest food all his life. "Pepper on the back," he said. "Green at the start, like a person who enters a room with a laugh and leaves money on the table." Irini snorted. "Is that a compliment?" "It is a reorder," he said, already reaching for his ledger. 2 days later, we took the morning ferry to the city to register our brand at the ministry office. A room with walls the color of old receipts, and a clerk who lit up when he saw our samples. "My grandmother pressed like this," he said, stamping our forms with gusto. "Now I sit in a chair and stamp. Your job is better." He tucked a bar of Eleni's soap into his drawer and pretended not to notice when we left a second for his wife. On the way back, we stopped at a small hotel that had called after seeing our brochure on Manolis's bar. The chef walked us through his kitchen like it was a chapel. He drizzled our oil on a slice of tomato and made everyone in the room taste in silence, then nodded once, decisively. "I will put your name on the menu," he said. "Guests like a story they can eat." That night, I wrote copy for the new labels with sentences that belonged to the grove. "Stone milled. First cold press. Harvested before noon from the east slope. Pepper finish. Bread's best friend." I tucked a tiny line along the bottom where only people who look for such things would find it. We kept going. Eleni found me at the table in the blue hour between work and sleep. "Sign?" she asked, tapping the place where the settlement draft lay waiting on my screen. "Yes," I said. My voice did not shake. We clicked through, and with each digital page, the past turned into a file instead of a fog. At the end, the system offered a confetti animation I did not expect. Eleni clapped anyway, as if the computer had chosen the right ritual. We walked outside. The grove exhaled. I did too. The forecast said wind, and the sky agreed. Nikos taught me the rules of a storm the way a good teacher teaches arithmetic, by turning it into steps that line up even when you are scared. Before, he said, you tie, you stow, you check. During, you do nothing stupid. After, you count. We tied nets, tarps, lids. We stowed tools, papers, the sign Eleni refuses to let the weather borrow. We checked the new press bolts twice, the old roof 3 times. The generator we pray we never need. When the wind came, it came like history, full of its own mind. The olives clattered like thoughts. We stayed inside and peeled garlic for tomorrow because hands want work. Irini showed up with a thermos and a story about the last time a storm tried to take the school roof. We sat under desks, she said. Children sang to make the fear walk to the back of the room. Eleni made soup with the calm of a person who has outlived several kinds of weather. We ate in the press house by the battery lamp while the walls talked like boats. Nikos walked the perimeter twice with a flashlight and a hat pulled low. The generator stayed a promise. By morning, the wind had decided it had made its point. We opened doors and did the last step, count. A few fallen branches, 2 nets tangled like gossip, 1 section of fence that had changed its mind about standing. Trees upright, fruit stubbornly attached, press humming like it dreamt of work. We fixed the fence before breakfast because some repairs want your empty stomach. Eleni set coffee on the post like an offering. It is good, she said. The trees remember. When the postman navigated the lane at noon, hair unbothered by wind in a feat I will never understand, he brought the settlement papers, countersigned. Julian's note was simple. Final. Funds to be wired Friday. You are free in all the ways that matter and some that do not. Proud of you. I sat on the porch steps and read the document straight through. Clean numbers. No poison clauses. Our strange clause intact. Each party acknowledges that the other is entitled to their story. There was a short addendum from Daniel's lawyer that felt like a bow made by a person who hates bows. No further contact is anticipated. I believed him. Eleni brought me a plate of tomatoes sliced in a fan. You look like a person who is both happy and sad, she said. I am, I said. I think that's what honest feels like. We toasted with glasses of cold water and tore bread with hands that smelled like lavender because the soap shelves were nearby. Nikos joined us, handed me a key I did not recognize, and nodded toward the shed where the old truck lived. You should learn, he said. Stick. We spent the afternoon in second gear. I killed the engine 6 times and apologized to no one. Irini waved from the lane and shouted unhelpful advice. The goats were unimpressed. By dusk, the truck and I had reached a truce. I could get us to the square without stalling. Nikos patted the hood as if it were a dog that had finally decided to sit. That night, the village returned to the square to rearrange tables and stories into a post-storm order. Father Ioannis made a joke about roofs and angels. Manolis poured free shots for anyone who had tied something yesterday. I danced once with Irini and once with Eleni, and twice by myself in the corner where the shadow is forgiving. The band played a song I did not know, and the women sang the part that does not need words. On the walk home, Eleni slipped her arm through mine. Tomorrow we pick, she said. The lower slope is jealous. Of what? I asked. Of the bottles, she said, dead serious. They want their turn to be inside. I slept hard and woke to a morning that looked like a clean page. A week later, Julian forwarded an email from Daniel, short, almost gentle. The house is listed. I took the map off the wall. It left a mark. I will patch it. There are circles I do not remember choosing. I hope the bowl arrives unbroken. I wrote back something true that did not reopen anything. The bowl arrived. Thank you for packing it well. Take care. I pressed send and did not check for a reply. We bottled After Italy Batch 2 with a line under the name Storm-Picked. The flavor had a new edge. Manolis said it tasted like a decision. The settlement funds arrived. I moved my share into 3 places: a savings account with my name only, a small equipment reserve for the partnership that made Nikos blush, and a stubborn, joyful purchase: 2 stout tables for the market with legs that do not wobble, and a shade canopy Eleni chose like she was dressing a child for the first day of school. We took the new setup to market on Saturday. The stall looked like we knew what we were doing. People stopped because it looked like an invitation instead of a yard sale. A tourist asked if we ship to her city. "Not yet," I said. "Soon." Eleni kicked my ankle gently. That is her approval move when she does not want to make a scene. On the way home, I drove the truck. I stalled only once, at the corner where every dog in the village congregates to judge. "You are becoming local," Irini said. "You are late and you blame the dogs." "Truth," I said. We laughed all the way to the lane. We planted the rosemary cuttings along the lower wall at dawn when the soil is agreeable and the sun has not learned to be ambitious. Irini measured distance with her palm and declared we were now landscapers. Eleni shook basil seeds into my hand for luck. Nikos whistled to the dog and acted like this was all normal. Paperwork found us there. Daphne Petridis came up the lane in flats nobody sensible would wear on a farm, smiling like a person who enjoys telling people their plans worked. She had our brand certificate, a small envelope with the first installment of the regional grant, and a stamped letter from Athens confirming my residency status as a partner in a rural enterprise. "Welcome to the bureaucracy that likes you," she said, handing me the stack. "It is rare. Be kind to it." We celebrated by doing nothing glamorous. Updating spreadsheets, labeling shelves, ordering bottles before the price hopped again. I set up a simple online shop with local pickup only for now, a deliberate limit that made us feel larger than we are without lying. The first order dinged in. Irini, who paid full price, wrote "customer since yesterday" in the notes, and insisted on a receipt like a proper troublemaker. In the afternoon, I taught a short workshop at the square for a clutch of tourists and 2 bored teenagers Irini bribed with lukumades. I showed them how to taste oil with the patience of someone who has learned to taste her own life. Warm the cup. Breathe in green. Sip. Let the pepper find the back of your throat. Wait for the leaf to return. They nodded as if I had told them a secret that belonged to their own mouths. A woman from the city approached after, shy. "I followed your labels on the ferry," she said. "I left someone who liked to lock doors. Your name on the bottle felt like a doorknob." "Then keep turning it," I said. She left with 2 bottles and Irini's phone number because no one should be alone in their first week of Brave. At home, a small package waited on the step with international tape and handwriting I recognized like a muscle memory. Claire's. Inside, a stack of photographs we had never gotten around to framing. A note that said simply, "You are who I always met for lunch," and a plane ticket to visit, that I could use or not, without explanation. The map we had circled together lay at the bottom of the box. I pinned it over the desk and circled one more place. Here. I took the old bowl down to the kitchen. Eleni watched me wash it like I was baptizing a child. We ate peaches over the sink in silence, and when juice ran down our wrists, she nodded as if I had passed a test. At dusk, the teenagers from the workshop biked up the lane and asked if they could help at market next week. We said yes and made them lift crates to prove they were not just here for stories. The smaller one looked at the press with solemn awe. "It smells like something my grandmother says in church," he said. Nikos wiped his hands on his pants and said, "Then we are doing it right." Before bed, I opened my email and found 3 things waiting like different kinds of weather. A confirmation from the ministry that our grant reimbursement had processed. A note from the cafe in Athens requesting my unfashionable honesty on their tile choices, and a message from Daniel's lawyer that consisted of 1 line I read twice to make sure it was not a trick. All terms complete. No further correspondence anticipated. We wish your client well. I closed the laptop. I turned off the lamp. I stood at the window and named the things in the dark. The rosemary line, the truck's square shadow, the press house door, the sky with its convenient holes. And then, because some blessings like to be spoken aloud, I said yes, not to a person, to a place, to a practice, to a life that asked me to show up with my hands. In the morning, I would wake before the sun and pull on boots that finally belonged to my feet. I would tie my hair, write invoices, taste the batch, argue gently with Eleni about how much salt is correct in soup, and let Irini draft me into another committee I did not know existed. I would drive the truck without stalling and wave at the dog corner like a queen. For now, I slept the kind of sleep that forgives. Harvest ended the way good work ends, with a little mess, a little music, and the kind of tired that feels like belonging. The last crates went into the press house. Eleni tied a ribbon on the season's notebook. Nikos washed his hands at the outside tap and said to no one and everyone, "We did not waste the tree's year." I stood in the doorway and let the sentence settle where vows go. On Sunday, we took After Italy to the square in rows that looked like a choir. Manolis set a bottle on every table as if setting out candles. Irini bullied the teenagers into stacking boxes and accepting praise with their chins up. Father Ioannis blessed our sign with a dip of his thumb and a joke about saints who prefer peppery oil. The band started early. The lights came on before the sun gave permission. We cut bread, poured green, and watched faces change when the flavor arrived late at the back of the throat like good news. Just before midnight, my cheap phone buzzed with a number I did not know. I let it ring once, then watched it stop. I pictured a townhouse in a different city, a patched wall where a map once hung, a bowl in a box that arrived unbroken. I wished that version of the story kindness and turned back to the table where Eleni was scolding me for slicing the tomatoes too thin. Later, at home, I pinned a new map above the desk, not of countries, of the grove. Rows named by wind and slope, notes in my hand and Nikos's. A small star where the rosemary had taken, and a smaller one by the lower wall where a stray cat had decided we were acceptable. Beside the map, the photograph Claire sent of us at 20, laughing with our whole faces. I texted her a picture of the square and typed, "Come, there's a chair." Funding cleared, paperwork stamped. The cafe in Athens chose tile like Riverstones and wrote E. Hart, consultant, on an invoice that made me grin at my old ghosts. We launched a tiny online shop with a pickup bell and a promise to ship in the spring. I wrote one more label line for the season's last run. We kept going, and then we stayed. On the first true cold morning, I drove the truck alone to the ridge. I parked crooked, like a local. I took the old Paris bowl from the passenger seat and ate a peach over the side. Juice on my wrist, sun on my face, sea exhaling. The bowl, the map, the grove, the press, the bread, the people. Proof that a life can be rebuilt without becoming a replica. When I went back down, Eleni met me with a slip of paper from the post. Residency made permanent. She kissed both cheeks and said, "Now you must learn to complain about taxes like everyone." Nikos added, "And to fix the pump when it sulks." Irini shouted from the lane, "And to dance badly with commitment." I said yes to all of it. Then I tied on my apron, wiped the cutting board, and reached for the bread knife. Work to do. Oil to pour. A future that answers when called by name.